Wanted to start, as always, by thanking you for joining us this afternoon and for taking an hour out of your day. I know that as busy parents and caregivers, an hour is a lot of time to ask, but I hope this will be productive for you. And as I mentioned at the start, if you weren't here at the beginning, we are going to play another round of Where is Morgan Today? Now, last time we had a game, I had a background, and one of our esteemed parent scholars was able to guess not only the name of the institution, which was the University of Oxford, but also the name of the library I was in. So today I am a different location. It is a university and it is in the United States. You can probably tell by the ground cover. It is east of where we are. I think that is not too much of a stretch to guess. And whoever guesses it first by putting the name of the institution in the chat will win a wonderful prize sent to you courtesy of University of California, San Diego. So my friends, my stellar scholars, we are on the next part of our journey, the next leg of our journey, and we call this one Athena's Visit and Making Ready for the Journey. And as we are following the epic poem, Homer's epic poem, the Odyssey, we'll talk about what the visit of Athena means, but just want to make sure that everybody knows that this will be available to you either through my slide share or through Sweetwater Union High School District website. So this is being recorded. I am available at your disposal to answer any and all questions, either in this context or by submitting them to the district. The last questions that you posed have been answered. There was one question that was somewhat incomplete. I think it said, my son as an 8th grader, what do you? So there's a lot of things that could follow you, that could follow what do you recommend, what do you suggest, what do you do? So please feel free to go back and complete that question, and I am very happy to answer that for you. So again, as always, if you have been here from the beginning, we're going to do the absolute same thing, and we are going to go back to the raison d'etre for these sessions, the recurring themes that we will always see: good for heart, good for head, and good for hands. And I think that as you move forward toward a career or toward college, a post-secondary life, these become very much more important to find a sense of balance. Those of us in the workforce know how critical balance can be. Those of us who are in education really do understand that. So what do we mean by this sort of intersectionality? In the middle, you'll see high performance. And especially if you are going to certain universities, we talk about academic performance, but in that same vein, we talk about service to others, which is becoming more important on applications to higher ed. Lifelong love of learning, that is something that persists beyond middle school, beyond high school, and into college, into career, and throughout your life. We survive because we learn. We survive because we develop essential skills. So any advisement that I can give you, whether it is where should my kid look at a college, or what career should they explore, or how can I get them to buckle down, where can I find motivation, you will find it at the intersection between head, heart, and hands. So again, it will always come here, and if it doesn't, you call me on it. All right, so this the title of this presentation has to do with Athena, and Athena in Greek mythology was the goddess of war and wisdom. Usually we associate Athena with war, but she was also the patroness of arts and industry. And in the story of the Odyssey, she assumes the form of Mentor, who is a trusted partner for Odysseus, and accompanies Odysseus's son on his quest. And the important thing about that is that Athena comes to Telemachus in a different form as one of his father's friends. And the idea here is that a mentor may come in a variety of forms. And although we talk about being assigned a mentor, or he or she was my mentor through school, we find mentors all over the place. Even if it's not a formal mentorship, we learn from people who are friends, who are teachers, who are wise people. And this is to say that mentors come in many forms, and you will see this as your child, your young adult progresses into a post-secondary lifespan. So let's talk today about getting ready for the journey. And what we're talking about really is, how can we position ourselves and our kids cognitively, intellectually, socio-emotionally, and metacognitively, meaning things like being organized, being resilient. How can we get them to a point where they are ready to embrace a life after high school? Because it can be a very scary thing no matter where you go. And I will give you some sound advice. I did not come up with this advice, but I did present it in another context. And this is advice by Charles Darwin. And of course, Charles Darwin is famous for his book, The Origin of the Species, but he also studied survival behavior amongst mammals. And we know when we look at the brain's primary purpose is survival. So the idea of survival of the fittest doesn't always mean who's the strongest or who's the smartest, but usually it means who can best manage change. And I think that we have all become experts in one way or another at managing change, especially in the wake of the pandemic. We all had to sort of be resilient and rearrange our lives. And this is absolutely very true, whether you're going into the workforce right after high school, whether you're going into a gap year program, whether you are going into a certificate or certification program, or whether you're going into a college or a university. You have to be able to adapt to change. And those who can do that will get through, and not only survive, but will also thrive. Now, when we had the opportunity to talk to admissions officers and university professionals, we found that there was an interesting overlap about what they thought. So who becomes most prosperous? Who becomes someone who can move up and thrive in either an organization or a university? And they seem to come to a consensus that the ability to adapt to changing circumstances and the willingness to learn through experience is applicable whether you are going to school to become a doctor or whether you are mid-career. Again, it's the idea that goes all the way back to Darwin, this idea about adaptability, willingness to change, willingness to learn. What we have realized is that our new economies is faced with rising automation. And this was something that was highlighted by industry professionals. My father, before he went to school, used to work in an auto plant. He used to work the lines at General Motors. Today, the job that he had is done by a robot. So when they were talking in industry about automation, they kept talking about, are you willing, are you eager to learn to do something else? And what we find is that the most important essential skill for being successful in college and career is the willingness to continue learning and how to adapt to changes in your environment. Some other common skills, and this is something to think about as we prepare our students, probably starting in 4th grade, to think about where they might want to be. There are essential skills that we want to support and develop, and you as parents and teachers can work together to do this. One is growth mindset. And when we talk about growth mindset, we're talking about the idea that intelligence can be increased. We are not given a set amount of intelligence that we have to deal with, but that as we practice, as we engage, we can grow in that area to take on new challenges and to understand that we're not always going to be successful. Sometimes we will fall. It's not all about the falling, but it is all about being able to pick ourselves up after we do. Creativity and innovation. When we talk to employers and when we talk to academics, creativity and innovation were underscored as some of the more significant skills to have. Now, those of you who attended large universities for freshman and sophomore year may not see that. Because you are in a hall with 400 other students and things do not seem creative or innovative in the slightest. But when you get to upper division courses after your sophomore year of university, you will find that that comes at that point. If you attend a smaller liberal arts college, you will see that emphasized from day one. If you go into the workforce, especially the technology workforce, that is a priority. Emotional intelligence and ethics, incredibly important. Emotional intelligence relates back to Darwin and his study of predator behavior, and that is the idea that you can read the room and that you are able to control your emotions, that you can sense emotions in others, that you can work effectively, that you can communicate effectively with others, and a good sense of ethics, a good sense of morality. Now, you will notice that we're not talking about content area. We're not talking about superior mathematic abilities. We're not talking about mastering AP or mastering the Common Core. These are skills that are taught or should be taught in an interwoven way. Things like focus mastery, communication, and storytelling. Very, very important. Even in the sciences, it is important to be able to know how you communicate what you have found, how you communicate the implications. So when you have a son or a daughter who is in English class studying genres of writing, that is all part of this. Information technology and media literacy. Kids tend to be naturals with this, but it also has to do with being critical consumers and critical producers of information. This is something that we talked about probably last year when we were talking about social media and kids' interface with social media. Global and cultural awareness. Living in San Diego, I think we have a keen sense that our regional culture, the sort of San Diego, Baja, Imperial County area is really only divided by a physical border, but socioeconomically and linguistically and culturally, we are very much intertwined, inextricably so. So this idea of understanding cultures. Time and money management, incredibly important. When we talk about student loans, when we talk about financing a college education, or we talk about going into the workforce and getting your first place or your first car, making investments and saving. Again, this not only has to do with practical organizational skills, but stress levels as well. Learning, literacy, and life skills. Again, the willingness to learn, embracing lifelong learning, being literate across areas, and just really having a good sense of how to live. Again, this is relevant whether you're coming to UC San Diego or if you are going to work in a shipyard or in a high-tech industry or a biotech company. All of these things are absolutely essential. And they didn't always have to be essential. They weren't always essential. At the turn of the last century, and remember when we talked, I think 2 sessions ago, we talked about the rapid rise of the number of college at the turn of the last century. Henry Ford at the time, who is well known for assembly line production, production en masse, and sort of the archetype for what schools were like at that time and into the future, this idea of being very individualized, very linear, and very detailed. He said, when we are at work, we ought to be at work. When we are at play, we ought to be at play. There's no use trying to mix the two. Now, you know, if you've attended any of my sessions, that is absolutely not true. You know, we understand that there are emotional components to learning, and we understand the neuroscience of persistence. So there has to be some degree of joy associated with work. Very different thinking at the turn of the last century than you know, present day, where we have Southwest Airlines saying, unless you're having fun doing what you're doing, you will rarely succeed. And there's another popular aphorism that says, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. So there is that idea. It really relates back to practical neuroscience. And why do I tell you this? Is because in addition to content knowledge, in addition to majors and workforce tracks, it is very important that we understand that industry writ large, whether you're in tech, whether you're in technology, whether you are in life sciences, whether you are in entrepreneurship, what it requires are things like creativity, empathy, a sense of joy in what you're doing, because we know neuroscientifically, if you don't enjoy what you are doing, your brain is going to give you the neurochemistry of avoidance and have you avoid the situation that makes you feel stressed and anxious and unhappy. Things like critical thinking, things like problem solving. Remember, that's the primary purpose of the brain in surviving. We solve problems. We don't necessarily warehouse information, but we solve problems. And part of the integrated curriculum, things like STEAM and holistic approaches to learning and problem-based learning, all have to do with this sort of brain compatibility. Being able to effectively communicate and really being able to read yourself, cultivation of sound habits of mind, things like being organized, things like you know, taking advantage of study skills and learning how to work together. So that changes the role of schools, but more importantly, it also changes your role as parents as you are looking toward the future. So how can we work together to attend to the cognitive needs, so those intellectual needs, those content area needs, socio-emotional well-being, and metacognitive well-being? And we're going to take a look at what is really important. And I'm going to ask you this question. So when you think about your student, your son or your daughter, and you think about, are they ready to take on these types of things? So whether they want to go to Yale or whether you know, they want to go to Raytheon, where do your children stand? What are their strengths? Where do they need supports, and what is your role? And we all know that the problem with adolescents is they don't necessarily vocalize a whole lot. So part of your role as parent, just as part of our roles as educators, is to serve as a detective of sorts. So really find out what makes our children tick, what brings them joy, and how can we support this? How can we support them in their decision making? And we'll talk about some of the pressures that kids face as they look towards higher education, for example, and where they you know, might want to take it. Now, here's something to know, and this is a bit of a refresher. because we want to talk about cognitive readiness. Now, one of the things that is great about the adolescent brain, now there are certainly things that are not so great, but there are some things that are really great about the adolescent brain. Is one of them is that they are more sensitive to neurochemical rewards. So when we talk about the neurochemistry of persistence, they are more sensitive. This makes them better learners. This makes them more eager to absorb knowledge and more capable of absorbing knowledge. And we'll talk about how that looks specifically. But it also makes them more likely to take risks. And the adolescent brain does not necessarily distinguish between the risk of raising your hand in class to answer a question or skating down the side of the building. The idea is that the brain chemistry at this age just loves the idea of risk-taking. So as parents and as caregivers and as educators, we have to think about how we direct those in our charge to take the risks that will benefit them, the risks that will yield rewards, but are not in the slightest bit dangerous. I am going to stop sharing just momentarily because I see there is a box. I don't want this to show up on the tape, so I'm going to start us off again here. Now, when we are children, when we are young children, this is when we begin to develop communication systems. Now, in adolescence, this is where we begin to refine and hone our communication systems. And those of you who are parents of teenagers may not see this because arguably adolescents aren't great communicators with parents or caregivers. With their friends, absolutely. Maybe with other adults, sure, other adults at the school, teachers and the like, counselors perhaps. But you have an opportunity to not only to influence this idea of learning and a productive risk, but also how adolescents communicate, again, which is a critical element of success in college or career. Now, what we know is that during adolescence, there is a substance, a white fatty substance called myelin. And what that does, it helps our brain cells communicate more effectively. And you may remember from our work in brain compatible learning, when neurons come together and create synaptic responses, it means that information is really flowing. So this is a time at which you will see this. You will see something called the white matter expansion that helps to explain why teens learn to adapt and learn more quickly. And it is important that we provide them with opportunities to do so, to really advance this process. Now, during adolescence, the gray matter, the part of the brain with synapses that make connections, shrinks a little bit. But this isn't anything to worry about. This is where we're doing some house cleaning in the brain and learning to run it more efficiently. So, you can think of perhaps Marie Kondoing your brain, this idea where we are going to prune off the stuff that we don't need so we can make other processes that much more effective. So this is to say, although we know that brain plasticity and the ability to change is incredible in our early years, our 2 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7, we also have another great chance during adolescence to make an impact. And these are going to be the impacts that stick. So let me see if I can stop sharing quickly and move this box away. It keeps popping up, I think. Now, I'm also going to give you another perspective. So we're talking about cognition and our abilities to undertake activities that lead to productive risk and reward, that engage the brain. those types of things. And we can also look at our socio-emotional development. And what you see here is the affective regions. Those are the regions that are emotional. This is our limbic system. This is the part of the brain that is producing emotions. And look how it grows from childhood to adolescence and evens out in adulthood. Now, the blue line that you see is our cognitive control regions. And this is the part of the brain that controls emotion. So if you look at adolescence, you will see that the gap tends to be much larger. So during that period of time, making emotional connections with learning, and it doesn't necessarily need to be in school, it doesn't necessarily need to be test preparation or AP courses, but making those connections at home, connections with emotions, connections with joy will make a bigger difference. And this, again, if you think about risky behavior, that's where you see the emotional connection. It gives us a bit of a charge. So providing emotional supports as well as mitigating risk or channeling risk is very important. And then by the time we're about 28, late 20s, everything balances out. So in that gap between the cognitive and the affective, there are amazing chances to really get our kids pointed in the right direction. Another way of looking at it, this is plasticity. This is the brain's ability to change in response to experiences, contrasted by the amount of effort that these changes require. And what you'll see is when we are 2 to 4 to 6, that is when our brains are most malleable. That is when we are really sponges. This is where we learn new stuff. This is where we define who we are. This is the best time to learn languages. But what you will see is in that spot between 11 and about 20 or so, this is where learning opens up, our learning processes accelerate, and our risk-taking processes accelerate. If we can marry the two, so much the better. And what we are able to do is we can bring in those things associated with post-secondary education or workforce development during those times, because they are novel experiences. We know that at this age, this age, I would say between maybe 11 and 18, we have kids who think primarily in the present versus the future. So when you are talking to a 12-year-old about college, for example, which would be, I don't know, maybe 7 years away, 6 years away, it might as well be 106 years to them. So the idea is to bring it into the present by providing positive experiences as early as is possible. So if there are things that are happening on campus, so for example, at UC San Diego, we have robust and vibrant pre-college programs and workforce development programs. We have workshops and classes and certificates for middle schoolers that are designed to inspire an interest in the pharmaceutical sciences, where they are actually doing compounding and looking at curing cancer as early as middle school. Now, this is not to turn them into cancer specialists by any means, but to first give them a very positive interaction with a post-secondary institution, a very friendly, a very supportive interaction, and also really to get their brains thinking and give them opportunities to explore their interests in an environment that is immersive and joyful. And it's not only at UC San Diego, Cal State San Marcos, San Diego State, Southwestern College has the YES Academy, which I recommend highly, but the idea is that we provide opportunities to introduce and immerse that will make a young kid, by the time that they get to us, let's say at UC San Diego, it already feels like home. You know, it is familiar, because as much as the brain likes novelty, it likes familiarity more. So, these programs, many of them are fellowship, many of them are scholarship or free, but the idea is positive interactions. It's also important to know about the pressures that you or teachers may be putting upon adolescents at any given time, insofar as the future is concerned. My parents were both professors, and my mother said, well, yeah, you can go anywhere that you like, as long as you're happy and as long as it's in the Ivy League. So as a sixth grader, I didn't really see a lot of opportunity to pursue my passions if they did not fit into Brown or Dartmouth or Princeton. And sometimes we also have implicit pressures that we put upon our kids when they say, hey, I want to do something in the arts, and parents may just sort of go, oh, that's good, that's nice. So be aware, because your kids are definitely aware. And I will tell you, as adolescents, they are hyper aware of that. And I think really when we talk about post-secondary opportunities, it's all about goodness of fit. And it is possible to get a world-class education in a variety of different settings. I can tell you from personal experience that had I attended a University of California campus as a freshman, I would have certainly dropped out, because it was too big, too overwhelming, and I was not sufficiently mature to handle it. I could really not navigate it on my own. I was too susceptible to all of the variety of temptations that one would find on a college campus. So I was really able to find my identity and become more mature at a community college setting. Certainly it wasn't bad for the wallet either. But when we think about post-secondary opportunities, and when we think about things like a gap year or going into the Peace Corps, for example, we really have to think about the individual. And just as much as we as educators try to differentiate and individualize, so too as parents do we have to think about it as well. And really what it's going to come down to is choices that we make. And a lot of the road ahead we have already paved out, and what lies ahead can be determined by the choices we've already made about life after high school. And how we understand what the future looks like will help us best prepare our kids cognitively for the future. So can we simultaneously prepare them for rigorous courses or exams or applications or internships? And in so doing, can we work together? And this is imperative. None of us can do this alone. Teachers can't do it alone, counselors can't do it alone, and parents can't do it alone. We all have to work together to instill in our progeny confidence first, and peace of mind, and understanding everything you know about the teenage brain and how susceptible it is. What can we do together? How can we work together? Now, George Santayana said, a child educated only at school is an uneducated child, and that is absolutely true. George Santayana is also famous for saying something else. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. So I think he has some good insights. So certainly teachers have roles in supporting kids cognitively and socioemotionally, but really our roles as parents is to really provide a degree of socio-emotional fitness and well-being. And at the heart of this is whether a student is in a position to realize these goals. So if you look at this hierarchy, this is by Abraham Maslow, and he said that unless your very basic needs are met, you can't progress into other things like prestige, accomplishment, realizing your full potential, or even having relationships. So as we think about our kids and we think about, okay, are they ready to pick a major? Are they ready to fill out an application? We always have to go back to the basics. Now, most of our kids, their basic needs, their physiological needs and safety needs are being met. But are there belongingness needs? Do they have friends? Do they have relationships? All of this has to do with neuroscience, because we know that when we have a degrees of anxiety and degrees of stress where we feel insecure, we feel unsafe, or we feel unwanted or not competent, we really can't move forward. Once we settle those needs down, then we can start thinking about things like fits. Then we can start thinking about things like the courses one has to take or the exams that one has to take. So the idea here is that both as parents and educators, we need to really pay attention, especially for adolescents who are not going to necessarily express their feelings openly. We need to make sure that not only the primary needs are met, but also the psychological needs are met. Because once a student feels not only competent and confident, then they can move ahead and they can really flourish and they can really blossom. That's why the idea of resilience is so important, because if we fail and we are punished for failing, then we are less likely to try again, because it brings in the survival mechanism and the neuroscience of avoidance, the neurochemistry of avoidance. So if we think cognitively, we know that adolescence is a prime time for learning and a prime time to take risks. We also know that if we can work to make sure that our kids have a sense of peace of mind, if they are feeling secure, if they have confidence in themselves and they have opportunities to succeed, they will be able to move forward and make better decisions ahead about the future. Another thing, again, this is a bit of a revisit. We have to think about identity development, because adolescents will go through several stages in a quest for identity. And some kids get stuck where they're never quite settled. They really can't figure out who they are. They can't really figure out what they want to be until it reaches a tipping point. So what I will do is give you a personal example. So when I was a young man after high school, I sort of wandered around. You know, I went from community college to community college and thought, well, maybe I'll get a full-time job. I'm really not sure what to do. You know I don't want to do what my parents are doing. So, I just kind of wandered around until I hit a point where I had an epiphany. And a lot of times what we're talking about parents doing is supporting the epiphany. And that is, the idea has to come from within the kid. This is where kids or young adults establish an identity, but it means a lot more and they are more committed to it if it comes from within than forced from without. Now you'll see in this diagram that if you're not committed and you don't really think about who you are or who you want to be, you'll never be settled. You'll just go from thing to thing to thing until you find the right fit. That is not the same thing as multi-potentiality. Multi-potentiality means that you have a plenitude of interests and you're good at a lot of things, but you really just can't find the right fit. This is a little bit different. This is just sort of wandering aimlessly until you sort of fall into something where you're really never quite settled. And if you're never quite settled, you're really never quite comfortable. And you're always wondering, did I do the right thing? Did I do the right thing? Moratorium happens after you may not have a commitment, but at least you're looking. You know, at least you're trying to find yourself. And at some point, you're going to hit a tipping point, a crisis point where you say, okay, I have to knuckle down. I have to get serious. I'm 22 right now, and I need to think about my future. I can't just wander aimlessly. Ultimately, hopefully, that leads to an identity achievement. And we'll talk about why that is difficult in college. Or there is another alternative where you already make a premature commitment to something without a lot of thought and without a lot of exploration. So this is the idea that I don't want to be an academic because my dad is an academic and, you know, my dad and I don't get along, so I'm going to be anything but. Or I'm going to be a doctor because my mom is a doctor and I love my mom. Or you know, that's it. I saw it on TV and I like what they're doing. You know, I don't like blood and I'm not empathetic and I don't like sickness, but it looks like a cool lifestyle, so I'm going to commit to it. So along with all of this sort of hyper-powered learning and risk-taking and you know, a search for well-being, your kids are going through this question about who they are. They have at this point distinguished themselves from you as something different, somebody different. So the guiding question here is, if I'm not my parents, then who am I? A lot of times you'll come around. Now, the one thing I knew that I didn't want to do when I was an adolescent is have anything to do with academia. I didn't want to have anything to do with psychology. I didn't want to have anything to do with university, especially the University of California. I'd do anything but you know, the arc is long and you wind up where you are supposed to be. But this confusion can really take a lot of time and a lot of energy, can sap a lot of mental and physical energy for your kids. So be aware that this is going on. And we're always worried about motivation. Now, when we talk about either you're applying for an internship or you are applying for an entry-level position in the workforce, or you're applying to a university, it takes a degree of motivation. And a lot of times that motivation will come extrinsically, which means somebody is pushing you to do it or it is incentivized. But it's not a simple problem to solve. There's not one universal answer. I always will hear questions, well, how do I get my kid to be motivated? Well, it's highly, highly individualized because you got to think about all of these facets. What are the rewards? What are their goals? Do they have the goals? Have they defined them? What opportunities are there? So for example, if you hear that Yale has a 5% acceptance rate and you're a kid, you may be thinking, well, I don't have the opportunity to do that, so I'm not motivated to do that. What is the challenge like? Now, if you have lived a life where you've been avoiding challenges because you want to be able to prove that you're strong, or you want to be able to fly under the radar, the level of challenge is going to make a difference. Now, the brain loves a challenge. So again, introducing challenge to your adolescence in a variety of forms is also something that is very important. But most of all is a support network. And that doesn't necessarily just have to be you. Again, when you think of mentor in the Odyssey, we know that mentors come in many forms. And we know that motivation really is one of our most primitive instincts. This determines how we follow life's path. We have to be motivated to move forward. It is instinctual, and it is something that we have at birth, whether we are learning how to crawl, or we're learning how to walk, or we're learning how to take an entrance exam. Motivation really lies at the heart of survival. Now, of course, there are extrinsic motivators that we talked about, outwardly focused rewards and sanctions. So, if you get into Cal State LA, your mom and I are going to buy you a car. Or if you don't get into Cal State LA, you will not be able to live at home anymore. For example, extrinsic motivators, carrots and sticks, that sort of stuff. But we really want our motivation to be intrinsic, something that becomes naturally satisfying. And you can translate extrinsic motivators into intrinsic motivators, which is something we'll talk about in our next session. Now, I'm conscious of the time, and we're going to continue this next time. But what I want to also highlight is this idea that something has to be worthwhile. And this has to do with our level of confidence. And this is why it's so important to be able to build confidence through these three elements, because this also has to do with motivation. So it's not only a question here when we look at expectancy theory, is this something that I can do? A confident person will say, yes, I can do this based on what I've been able to do. Again, talking about the importance of early exposure to post-secondary opportunities or workforce opportunities. It is something that I can do based on my experience and my confidence. That has to do with growth mindset. And then, of course, instrumentality has to do with, well, if I do this, what am I going to get from it? So if I'm spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars applying to colleges, I know that I can do it. I know that I can fill out an application. I know I can take the test, but what am I going to get out of it? Will it be sufficiently satisfying? And then the idea of balance is really understanding how valuable this all is. So if somebody really is feeling forced to go to college, they may be able to do it, and it may give them a great result. It may help them a lot. They may be able to get in, but if it's not important to them, motivation will tend to flag a bit. So the next time that we meet, we're going to talk about goodness of fit. We're going to talk next time also about mapping out the adventure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to overlay the map of Odysseus's hero's journey on to your hero's journey. And if you're interested about where we are in this journey, we are coming to the second act. We're already looking at what we call the known. We've already said, yes, let's figure this out. We talked about some of the initial resistance we might find, and we talked about motivation. So we are going to finish up the act and then move on to the second, where we look at things like fit, where we look at admissions requirements, where we look at the nitty gritty, how do we pay for things, and what, when to visit, and all of that sort of stuff. So I'd like to welcome back Ms. Delgado and Mr. Dominguez, because I know we want to leave a few minutes for questions. And make sure, please, if you have other questions, put them into the chat. Questions will always get to me courtesy of the wonderful spreadsheet that Ms. Simmons has put together to answer them. But wondering if there's anything that is popping out of the chat, immediately.
Yeah, so one of the questions we have is that, for example, Ms. Milan has mentioned that her daughter wants to go to nursing, which is great because she actually has, as you mentioned, a plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Her choice is San Diego State. She wants to know how to help her and how to actually register, right?
Okay. Well, that is something that actually sort of registering and applying is something that we will talk about in our next session and the session following, sort of the mechanics of all of that. One of the things that I would certainly recommend is, always a visit to the campus if there are summer programs where there is immersion, if there are health related programs. I can tell you that at UC San Diego, we do offer health-related programs without cost for adolescents, where they can really sort of get a sense of it. Yeah, we will look at the mechanics of the application and things like writing the essay, or if you are going to be interviewed, how to prepare for an interview. We'll also look at internship opportunities prior to post-secondary education or prior to entering the workforce that may help. So that is coming.
Okay. Yeah, one of the other questions that goes along with that is Ms. Keisha Edwardson asking, is there a place online or some sort of resource that will tell us what all the California colleges or universities are and some information about them, like location, enrollment, and tuition? If I can answer that a little bit, one of the good resources that we have here at Sweetwater is that your counselors do have a lot of connections, a lot of communication with the different universities. So that would be a great place to sort of start looking at the different universities that are out there. Your child's counselor would have a lot of information regarding that, and those conversations are great to have, because then you start seeing sort of like what's available out there. But I'm sure Dr. Appel has more on that as well.
Mm-hmm. And what I can provide are some links. If you're just sort of interested in sort of the basics, things like location and how many campuses and annual tuition and fees, I can provide some websites about that. There are, U.S. News and World Report is always a great place to look as well. But I will make sure to give you some sites that not only include the public universities, but the private ones as well.
Okay. Another one from Ms. Flores, Vanessa Flores, says, what is a gap year curriculum?
A gap year can take on a number of forms. And when I talk about a gap year, and we'll look at gap years in greater detail in the next two sessions, but that is taking a year. So let's say that you do want to go to a university, but you would like to, let's say, spend time traveling or spend time devoted volunteering to a cause or spend some time in the workforce. That is a gap year. There are some universities that actually have a gap year curriculum, which isn't a full-fledged university schedule, but a few classes along with a lot of experiential learning. And I can tell you that when I was growing up and I mentioned, it wasn't called a gap year. I just said, oh, I'm going to take the year between high school and college. I'm going to take a year off to do some exploration. First of all, that did not resonate well with anybody, any adults in my circle, but they didn't call it a gap year at that point. But the idea is that you are able to take some time to focus, to hone down some of your decisions about what the future might look like, maybe be engaged in volunteerism or travel. And now there are structured frameworks around gap years. So it's not just, hey, I'm going to go backpacking through Europe, but I'm actually going to go in a way where I am engaged in experiential learning. But we'll talk more about gap years and what they look like in the next few sessions.
We'll do one more question that we have is from, and I'm going to probably not mention or pronounce his name, is Youngson, which is, my son is already a junior high, still not sure what he wants to do. Where should he start looking, doing to encourage him what careers he might be interested in?
I think it has a lot to do with immersion and exposure. And this idea that it's never really too early to start, which is one of the reasons that we started our collaboration with the School of Pharmacy. Now, there is, what winds up happening is, let's say you have somebody who is interested in working in a hospital, or who is interested in working in healthcare, and they think that the only route to that, for example, may be to become a doctor or a nurse. And let's say it's a person who it may not be well suited to either of those. Well, there are a variety of different types of professions. So for every healthcare organization, there needs to be attorneys, there needs to be people in communications, there needs to be accountants, there needs to be creatives, there needs to be learning specialists, there needs to be tech people. So, again, I think providing immersive experiences is a great start. And what I would recommend, you can always head over to our website, and you will be able to see some of the things that we do through our Sally Ride Science Academy. And certainly for the parents here, we can provide scholarships for your kids to engage in that, but it shows the depth and breadth of professions. And you also want to make sure that you have a very good understanding of what drives your kids. So if your son, for example, is somebody who is continuously and constantly engaged in video games, you can actually translate that into a career by saying, okay, you love playing, but wouldn't you also love to design video games? So that leads to coding, that leads to, infotech careers, things like that. So I think, if you see that your child or young adult is gravitating towards a particular profession, show them the depth and the breadth of the profession. And again, really get a good sense of what interests them. If they are interested in anime, for example, there are all sorts of things in the world of not only the arts, but also in design that are available to them.
And then finally, Dr. Appel,
Yes.
the background. What is the background?
Oh, what is the background? Have there been any guesses?
We have MIT, we have UCSD, we have Yale University, Princeton, Oxford University, Stanford University, Harvard.
Okay, well, wow. I mean, you've ran the gamut of them. Now, I have never been at UCSD when it's this snowy, so it's not UCSD. Harvard is a great guess. You can tell by some of the architecture, great guess. Yale, very much sort of a Gothic campus. The one that it is, everybody came very close. This is actually my father's alma mater. This is the University of Chicago, Southside Chicago. But very, very close. We will, in our next session, we will have another background, and I will try to make it a little more obvious next go round.
Thank you, Dr. Appel. If you have any questions, keep putting them in the chat. We also have the Q&A. As you notice also on our chat, we also have a page for all the questions that have been asked in previous sessions. We're just putting them there in no particular order. We will make sure we put them in order going forward. But for now, we just want to make sure we have the information out there. Please send us your questions if you have any specific questions as well, either to Dr. Appel or ourselves, and we'll make sure that he gets them if there's anything very specific that might have to do specifically with your student, okay? And Dr. Appel, if you want to go ahead and give your information, this is what the contact information is for Dr. Appel.
Yes, this is my contact information. I respond to emails within 24 hours, if not less. So if you do have specific questions, if it's about an application or what have you, just send me an email. I'm happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Appel. We will go ahead and stop recording, and have a great rest of your day, everybody else, if you are leaving us.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Delgado.
Thank you, Ms. Delgado. Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ana. Thank you,
Thank
Cindy.
you.